Morning they put my wife in the ground. My son-in-law put his hand on my shoulder and told me I had 72 hours to get out of my own house. He didn't shout. He didn't even look at me when he said it. He was watching the priest, his face arranged into something that resembled grief, and his voice was barely above a whisper. Just low enough that no one else could hear, just loud enough that I could. The house belongs to me now, Edmund. 72 hours. That's more than fair. I stood there with my hat in my hands, and the November wind coming off Lake Huron like it had a grudge, and I didn't say a word. I just nodded once and looked back at the hole in the ground where they were lowering my Margaret. He thought that nod meant surrender. He was wrong about a lot of things. I should back up. You need to understand what kind of man my son-in-law is before any of this makes sense. And you need to understand what kind of woman my daughter was, because she was the whole point of everything. My name is Edmund Marsh. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years working for the city of Owen Sound as a civil engineer, mostly roads and drainage, occasionally bridges. It is not glamorous work. It is work that matters. I raised 2 kids in a 4-bedroom house on 4th Avenue East that I bought in 1989 for $147,000 and paid off by 2008. I shoveled my own driveway until I was 64. I still do, mostly. My back disagrees, but it can go to hell. My wife, Carol, not my daughter. My wife, this is confusing, and I'll explain. My wife, Carol, passed 11 years ago. Cancer. The quiet kind that doesn't announce itself until it's already won. After that, it was just me in the house and the dog, a shepherd mix named Hector, who also passed eventually. And there was just me in the house. My daughter, also named Carol. Yes, she was named after her mother. No, it doesn't get less confusing. Moved back to Owen Sound in 2017 after a job transfer brought her home from Toronto. She'd been working in insurance claims management. She was 41, sharp as a tack, had her mother's eyes and her grandfather's stubbornness. She moved into a rental on 8th Street East, and we started having Sunday dinners again. And I thought, this is good. This is something good happening. She met Kevin at a fundraiser for the hospital. He was a contractor, residential builds mostly, a few commercial projects around the Grey County area. He was 44, well-dressed, said the right things, laughed at the right moments. I shook his hand and thought, this one's rehearsed. I said nothing. She was 41 years old, and she didn't need her father's opinion on who she brought home. They got married in September 2019. Small ceremony. Georgian Bay in the background. Everyone cried in the good way. I walked her down the aisle, and she squeezed my arm and whispered, "Don't you dare cry before I do." I cried anyway. They moved into a rental house initially. Then my daughter brought up the idea of her and Kevin moving in with me. The house was too big for one person. I had the space. Kevin's contracting business was doing well, but not well enough that they could afford to buy an Owen Sounds market, which had gone ridiculous by 2021. It made sense, practically speaking, I agreed. Kevin agreed, a little too enthusiastically I thought at the time, and filed away for later. What I know now, what I didn't know then, was that Kevin had been doing his own research. The house on 4th Avenue East was assessed at $680,000 in 2021. Since then, property values in Grey County had climbed another 30%. He knew that. He'd done the math, and somewhere in the back of his mind, behind the handshakes and the Sunday roasts and the occasional round of golf he invited me to, a game I do not play and have never played, he was thinking about inheritance. My daughter didn't know that either. I want to be clear about that. She was not part of any plan. She loved that man. That's the hardest part of all of this. She got sick in the spring of 2023. It started as fatigue. She was tired all the time, which she attributed to stress at work. Then it was weight loss. Then it was a visit to her GP, then a referral, then a specialist in Barrie, and then a morning in April when she called me from the parking lot of the Royal Victoria Regional Health Center, and I could hear in the first syllable of my name that the news was bad. Stage 3, ovarian cancer, aggressive. Treatment options existed, but the outlook was uncertain. I will not dwell on what the next 14 months looked like. It was chemotherapy and setbacks and some good weeks that felt almost normal, and then worse weeks that didn't. Kevin, to his credit, took her to most of her appointments. He was attentive, at least visibly. He held her hand in front of people. He said the right things. My daughter loved him and told me so, and I believed that she believed it. What I noticed, and kept to myself, was that he started asking questions. About the house. About whether I had a will. About what I planned to do with the property if anything happened to me. He framed these as practical concerns. Estate planning. Very important to have your affairs in order. He mentioned a buddy of his who did wills and powers of attorney, said he could get me an appointment at a discount. I told him I'd think about it. I had already handled it. I just hadn't told him. My wife Carol, the first Carol, had a sister named Frances who married a man named David Kowalczyk. David became a real estate lawyer, did very well, retired to a place outside Collingwood about 10 years ago. David and Frances have been good friends of mine for 30 years. We have coffee when I drive down. He taught me how to properly maintain a snowblower, which is more useful information than you might think. In the winter of 2022, before my daughter got her diagnosis, before any of this started, David sat across from me at his kitchen table and said, "Ed, you need to get your house into a trust." He wasn't being alarmist. He was being David, which is methodical and thorough and occasionally irritating because he is usually right. He explained it. A properly structured family trust, administered by an independent trustee, meant that the property wasn't simply mine to leave or to lose. It created legal protection that a simple will did not. It meant that no one, not a creditor, not a son-in-law, not any future complication, could just walk in and claim an asset that had been in the Marsh family since I was 34 years old. I hired a lawyer in Owen Sound, a woman named Patricia Osei, who was in her late 40s and had a framed group of 7 print in her office and did not waste my time. She did not ask me whether I was sure. She listened, asked 4 questions, took notes, and told me what it would cost. We had the documents finalized and registered before Easter 2023. The house on 4th Avenue East was no longer simply my house. It was held in trust. I was the primary trustee, David was the secondary trustee, and the terms were clear and legally binding. Kevin's name appeared nowhere in any of it, neither did the name of any spouse of any child of mine. Patricia filed everything through the appropriate land registry office. The title showed the change. Kevin had done research on the property. Evidently not enough. My daughter died on a Wednesday in June. She was 48 years old. She had made me promise at some point during her illness that I would not fall apart, which is an impossible thing to ask of a person, but I understood why she asked it. She wanted to know I'd be all right. I told her I would. I meant to try. The funeral was held at Greenwood Cemetery, where her mother is buried 3 rows over. The minister said good things. My son Andrew flew in from Calgary. He stood beside me and we didn't speak much, but we didn't need to. We've always been like that, Andrew and I, comfortable with silence. Kevin stood on the other side of the grave. He had flown in his sister and brother-in-law from Mississauga. He was wearing a suit that looked new. I noticed the suit. I noticed a lot of things after the service, after the reception at the church hall, after the last casserole dish had been handed over and the last handshake exchanged. Kevin found me in the parking lot while Andrew had gone to get the car. That's when he said it. 72 hours. He said the house was his now, by rights. His wife had lived there. He had contributed to the household. He said there were legal avenues he could pursue, but he'd rather keep things clean. 72 hours was generous, he said. I could take my personal effects. I looked at him. His eyes were dry. I don't say that as an accusation. Grief doesn't always look the same, but I noticed it. I said, "All right, Kevin." He nodded, satisfied, and walked to his car. Andrew pulled up 30 seconds later and said, "What was that about?" "Nothing," I said. "Let's go." I drove to Collingwood the following morning. Frances made coffee and went for a walk deliberately, which is why I married her sister and not her. David sat across from me and I told him what Kevin had said. David didn't react visibly. He asked one question. "Has he looked at the title recently?" "I don't know what he's looked at." David nodded slowly and picked up his mug. "Let him look." I drove back to Owen Sound. I packed a bag not because I had to, but because I wanted to be somewhere else while the next part happened. Andrew had taken a hotel room on the waterfront, and I joined him there. He didn't push me for explanations. I told him there were things in motion, and to be patient. Kevin, in the meantime, was not patient. He called me twice on Thursday. I did not answer. He left a voicemail on the second call that was polite in the way that a threat is polite when the person making it is still confident. He said he'd hate for this to become a legal matter. On Friday, he apparently contacted a real estate agent. I know this because the agent called Patricia Osei's office, having done due diligence and found the trust registration, to inquire about the ownership structure of the property. Patricia called me that afternoon. She sounded professionally neutral, which I have come to understand is her version of amused. She said, "Someone is trying to list your house." I said, "I know." She said, "They're going to have a difficult time." I said, "I know that too." What Kevin discovered when he actually looked at the land registry, and I don't know exactly when he looked, but I know he looked because Andrew spoke to a mutual acquaintance who told him Kevin had gone very quiet, very suddenly, was that the house on 4th Avenue East was not his wife's asset and had never been. It was held in trust. He had no claim. He had no pathway. He had nothing. He called me. He had known. He called me Saturday morning. His voice was different. The confidence was gone. He said we needed to talk. I said, "We are talking." He said he thought we had a misunderstanding. He said he may have spoken in haste after the funeral. He said grief makes people say things. I said, "It does." He said he hoped we could move forward without any unpleasantness. I said, "Kevin, I want you out of that house by Monday." Here is what I haven't told you yet. The part Kevin didn't know about. The part that was worse for him than the trust. During the 14 months my daughter was sick, I was paying attention. I am an engineer. I look at things. I notice when systems aren't working the way they should. My daughter's decline in the final 4 months was faster than her oncology team expected. Her doctor in Barrie, a careful, precise woman who did not use words carelessly, mentioned at one appointment that the trajectory was unusual given the treatment response they'd seen earlier. She didn't say anything further. She didn't have enough to say anything further. I did not say anything at that appointment either. But I had been watching. There was a woman Kevin had been seeing. I did not know her name initially. I had seen her once in the parking lot of the Foodland on 10th Street, sitting in Kevin's truck when Kevin was supposed to be in Barrie. Was my daughter at a treatment appointment. He wasn't in Barrie. Andrew later found out, through means I won't detail. But Andrew is meticulous when he decides to be. That Kevin had asked a colleague to drop my daughter off at her appointment that day. I also noticed, in the last months, that Kevin had become very attentive about my daughter's medications. He managed her prescriptions. He organized her pill schedule in one of those weekly organizer trays. He drove to the pharmacy. He was helpful about it in the way that a man is helpful, when helpfulness serves a purpose. I am not a doctor. I am not a detective. What I am is a man who noticed things and wrote them down in a notebook that I kept in my truck, not in the house. I brought that notebook to the Owen Sound Police Service in July, 3 weeks after my daughter's funeral. I spoke with a detective sergeant named, I'll call him the detective sergeant named, I'll call him the detective. He read what I had written. He asked questions for 90 minutes. He was not dismissive. He told me he couldn't make me any promises about where it led, but that he would look. They looked. Kevin had been seeing a woman who was a nurse at a walk-in clinic in Barrie. She had access. She had knowledge. Whether she used either of those things in a way that mattered, and whether Kevin directed her to, I don't know. That's not for me to determine. That's for the Crown. What I know is that in September, 4 months after my daughter's funeral, 2 detectives from the Owen Sound Police Service knocked on the door of the house on 4th Avenue East, where Kevin was still living, because I had not moved back in and was not going to push the issue while an investigation was active. Kevin opened the door. They went inside. They were there for 2 hours. They left with boxes. Kevin was charged in November. The nurse in Barry was charged as well. The charges involve criminal negligence and what the Crown is calling administration of a noxious substance. I will not speculate beyond that. The cases are before the courts. I will attend every day of that trial if my back allows. Andrew flew back to Calgary in July. He calls every Sunday. He wanted me to come stay with him through the winter, but I told him I was fine. I am, mostly. I moved back into the house in October. I painted the kitchen a color my daughter had picked out 2 years ago and never gotten around to using. It's a kind of warm gray that the paint chip called Harbor Mist. She had the chip stuck to the fridge with the magnet for 2 years. I found it behind the shooter bowl. I painted it myself. It took a weekend. My back complained the entire time. The house is quiet in the way that houses are quiet when they've held too much loss. I've lived in this house for 35 years. My wife's garden is still in the back, gone mostly wild now. But the peonies come back every June without any help from me. My daughter used to cut them and put them in a jug on the kitchen table. I let them be. I have Sunday dinners now with David and Francis in Collingwood sometimes, or with my neighbor Yvonne, who is 72 and makes an exceptional tortillard and pretends she doesn't know it's exceptional, which is a very Canadian quality that I have always admired. People ask me sometimes, not often, but sometimes, whether I feel like I won. Whether the trust, the investigation, Kevin being charged, whether that's justice. I don't know what justice looks like from the inside. From the inside, it looks like a kitchen painted Harbor Mist, and a phone call from Andrew on Sunday, and Hector's old leash still hanging by the door. Because I haven't had the heart to move it. What I know is that the house is still mine. My daughter's name is on the trust document as a beneficiary intent, and that's where it will stay. The land is not going anywhere. The peonies will come back in June. Kevin told me in that parking lot on the worst day of my year that he was being more than fair. I nodded. I didn't argue. I had already made my arrangements. I had made them 15 months before he asked. He just hadn't thought to look. I've had a lot of time to think about what Kevin actually believed. Standing in that parking lot at Greenwood Cemetery with the wind off the bay and my daughter not yet cold in the ground. I think he believed he'd read the situation correctly. He'd watched me for 2 years. A quiet man, getting older, living alone in a house too big for him, grateful for company. He'd done his research on the property values. He'd calculated the angles. And he looked at me and saw someone who would fold. That's the thing about people who operate the way Kevin operated. They're not stupid. They're just wrong about what they're measuring. What he measured was my age, my silence, my willingness to keep the peace at Sunday dinner. What he didn't measure was the 31 years I spent as an engineer, where you learn that the work that matters is never visible. It's underground. It's in the drainage that keeps the road from washing out, in the load calculations that keep the bridge standing. Nobody sees it. Nobody needs to see it. It just holds. I did not put that house in trust because I suspected Kevin specifically. I did it because David sat across from me with his coffee and explained what could go wrong. And I listened. That's all. I listened to someone who knew more than I did. I acted on what I heard, and then I got on with things. That's not cleverness. That's just paying attention. What I keep coming back to in the evenings when the house is quiet and the street outside has gone dark is the notebook, the one I kept in the truck. Every date, every observation, every detail that seems small on its own. I am not a suspicious man by nature, or I didn't used to think I was. But something in me kept writing things down. Maybe it was the engineer's habit of documentation. Maybe it was something I didn't want to name at the time. My daughter deserved better than what she got. That's the fact I sit with. Whatever the courts determine about Kevin and the nurse and Barry, whatever the outcome of those proceedings, my daughter was 48 years old, and she had her mother's eyes, and she deserved more years than she was given. No outcome changes that. I don't think in terms of winners and losers here, because there are none. There is only what happened, and what I was able to do about the parts I could reach. What I can say is this: the house is still here. The trust holds. Andrew calls on Sundays. The peonies came back this June exactly as they always do, without any prompting, without any help from me. The actions we take quietly, without announcement, without needing anyone to witness them. Those are the ones that last. Kevin made noise. Kevin made plans he told people about. I filed documents and kept a notebook in my truck, and said all right in a parking lot and drove to Collingwood. He thought my silence was weakness. It wasn't. It was just patience. And patience, I found, is what everything else is built on.